Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reviews where today we're going to be checking out a track from an act named Tyeon titled They Know I'm Famous. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves a track on the screen. We're going to listen through it from start till finish on YouTube, the official music video, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's go. Really pretty synth melody to start things off. It's gorgeous, I like the way it develops.
I don't care what the haters say, I'm a prodigy. I don't care what they think of me, I'm just being me. I stay doing me, yeah, I bring the heat, being all I can be. Cause they know I keep it real, they just mad cause I came up all the way, yeah. They just mad cause they know I got that spotlight, I stay being me. I got everything, they just mad cause they know that I'm famous. They said I couldn't make it, but look at me now. I reached 100K, and I'm never backing down. They stay judging me, do the time for me. Reach them 1,000 views, they just mad, cause they can't compare. I don't care what the haters say, I'm a prodigy.
I will continue with the filter, okay.
They think of me, I'm just being me. I don't care if they hate on me, my thousands speak for me. They just mad they didn't make no moves. I got 100,000 views, they cannot compare to me. I don't care what the haters say, I'm a prodigy. I don't care what they think of me, I'm just being me. I stay doing me, yeah, I bring the heat, being all I can be. Cause they know I keep it real, they just mad cause I came up all the way, yeah. They just mad cause they know I got that spotlight, I stay being me. I got everything, they just mad cause they know that I'm famous. I don't care what
There's absolutely no point.
I don't care what they think, I came up, that's all me. No help, that's all me. They stay judging me, do the time for me. Reach them 1,000 views, they just mad cause they can't compare. I don't care what the haters say, I'm a prodigy. I don't care what they think of me.
I want you to use the repeaters as well on top.
They hate on me, my thousands speak for me. They just mad they didn't make no moves. I got 100,000 views, they cannot compare to me. I don't care what the haters say, I'm a prodigy. I don't care what they think of me, I'm just being me. I stay doing me, yeah, I bring the heat, being all I can be. Cause they know I keep it real, they just mad cause I came up all the way, yeah. They just mad cause they know I got that spotlight, I stay being me. I got everything, they just mad cause they know that I'm famous.
I'm glad we finally found a place to pause about 10 seconds before the end of the track. Part of the reason I wanted to pause and I said there was no point and stuff like that is simply because of the fact that this track just had constant transitions between sections. You know, it was unpredictable in the sense that you weren't sure whether we're going to have like a lyrical crossover into the next bit or whether we're just going to start at the start. We had nice amounts of variation with the motif there, despite the fact that we kept it consistent throughout. I think that was a great production decision. I mean, we could talk about this stuff in the conclusion, but there are reasons why I wanted to talk but couldn't. I'm still happy with it. I like the chopping of that synth motif there. I think that's kind of dope. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to appreciate about this track I'm going to talk about in the conclusion. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this track from an act named Tyeon titled They Know I'm Famous. Now, what do I think this track is about? I think it's about Tyeon kind of discussing his need to sort of like, I suppose, cope with the people who are maybe being disparaging towards him. They don't necessarily like his music, or they have negative sort of like opinions of him as a person or his career or whatever. And Tyeon is just basically saying, hey, look, it's pretty much just comes down to the fact that they're jealous, you know, that they don't have what I have, they don't have those thousands of views and everything like that. And I'm successful and they're just, you know, just haters. It's basically what it comes down to. You know, I think that's, there might be more nuance to that, but that's the crux of it. I think there's people that will be able to relate to that in a sense that, you know, there are people that will go, oh yeah, no, absolutely, I completely relate to like that feeling of someone being jealous of my own success. Then there will potentially also be the other side of the coin, which is people who maybe feel the way that Tyeon is discussing, where they have issues with him or his music or whatever reason, and they're going to potentially watch this simply kind of either like going to quote unquote hey watch it, or they're just gonna watch it because they're curious about the rebuttal towards that. And I think that, in a sense, it's fairly effective. I mean, like, if it really, the internet is such a wild west that you really cannot afford to become too emotionally reliant on positive affirmation as a content creator, as a musician, or whatever. Because people can just basically say what they like within reason. There's very little to stop someone putting something. It'll, even if like it gets removed eventually or it gets blocked or whatever, you know, it's very difficult to stop that initial damage. So it's good that I think that Tyeon is voicing that. I think his vocal style there is relatively easy and accessible. It's very soft. Like, there's a bit of aggression there, but not too much. I think the breathiness of the performance there kind of suits, offering a bit of sort of tonal moderation there. You know, you can come across as potentially kind of arrogant if you're too sort of on the nose with your disdain for people who are calling you out on this kind of stuff. And the way that Tyeon sings and raps, it's like the melodic rapping. It's more sort of like, we are comfortable and confident within ourselves, and we genuinely just don't really need feel the need to kind of address it or like change what we're doing to suit other people. And you have to kind of admire the fact that he's just doing him. It's cool. It's great to be able to sort of build a career on your ability to do yourself, in the sense that, like, you know, to do your own music, do your own sort of like brand, etc. The vocal melodies were compelling. I like the use of repeaters and some of the end bits there. We had development of it gradual. We didn't have huge changes in the way that we did the vocal melodies and stuff like that between the various sections, but I don't think we necessarily needed to, and I don't think that would have necessarily benefited the performance or the experience. I think that it was a reasonably solid vocal take, and the story matched that well stylistically. It was good to have the track as well below that 3 minutes, right in the middle of that 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. It was a concept piece that I think was communicated rather eloquently, and I don't think we needed to necessarily have more than this to be able to kind of appreciate what was going on there. I think that the mixture of the synth intro with the drums and the bass and maybe some other pads and external sub layers was more than enough to keep us going throughout that time frame. And I think that it was nice to have Tyeon as the focal point with the amount of range going on with like the filtered parts like in the bridge sections, etc., or simply the more kind of clarity parts with like the cymbals, the basses, etc., with the percussive and other sections. There was like an A-B kind of structure to it that made the 2 and a bit minutes or nearly 3 minutes kind of fly by really succinctly. I don't think there would have been room for an additional solo layer or lead layer in this. I think we had enough range with the misty kind of decayed filtering of the early sections before the drums and bass came in to sort of satisfy the needs of those looking for more instrumental accompaniment or further diversity with that. It was nice to have a simple bass line that rolled between like a 4-note. There was a relative amount of complexity to the arrangement. I think that we did have an unpredictable chord progression there. We had like kind of 2 halves to it with changes on each, and that looped well. And I think that actually I've got to give a shout out to Tyeon there, because I think a lot of people will stick with like the same 2 to 3 or 4 chords, but for it to kind of how to describe it, to behave in a way where it kind of extends itself to a larger form pattern. You get less looping of that by default of it being a longer section within the same amount of time, and therefore it is more intriguing. And again, we had the filtering of like the synth parts kind of making it sound all wishy-washy, like we're kind of in our own head kind of speaking our truth, etc., as if we're putting the vocals into focus maybe. But yeah, with some reasonably complicated bass line and chord progression to the motif there, we had interesting changes in the drum patterns there. We had enough to kind of seg us over there without overwhelming things too much. Nice combination of various sort of kick, snare, and hi-hat patterns there, ranging between the 8ths and the 16ths there. A nice chimey, accessible, pretty synth lead motif there at the start that kind of carried throughout regardless of the modulation or not. And the music sounded like it was surrounding you in the headphones. In the stereo field, it was the pads used. Everything else that was kind of writhing and wriggling around in there was, it was like you were in like space, you know, in space surrounded by stars. It was very pretty. I think it's important when you write a track to create an ambience, a sense of an environment that is maybe different to what the listener is, and to kind of take you into the world of the song itself. The motif overall with those synth basses and drums was compelling. I think that it kind of spoke of 2 things. The first it spoke of is a quiet, calm disagreement with what the other people were saying, as if we were kind of sad that they would feel that way towards us in the first place. That was what I got from the minor triads that we had within there. the fact that we kind of resolved on a minor, that it was in the minor key. And the other thing I got from it was that we just simply had the drum beat propelling us forward. Had moments of maybe not necessarily being totally sure about what other people were saying about us, but then we kind of like we're just trying to do our own thing at the same time. So we're almost maybe even tuning out the negativity there, and then it's just back to business with the percussion and groove pulling us forward. So in essence, I think that the motif works. The vocals seg nicely and have a great presence in the mix there, just from a composition perspective alone. And I think that the story matched the motif well too. And it's just a studio recording, mixing, mastering here. The only thing I'd say there, because I think the leveling in general was pretty good between the various instruments in the mix. It wasn't a hugely complicated arrangement, which I think would have been, that would have been detrimental to have overcomplicated that. But, you know, it was nice to wind a stereo field with lots of instruments kind of like cascading and floating around there, or at least the main ones were doing so. The vocals are present in the mix, but I couldn't help but think we could have maybe had like the vocals a little bit less dry. We could have added a little bit more sort of like reverb to them or something like that. They sounded good, don't get me wrong, and I liked the crispness to them to an extent. But I think if you have such kind of dreamy textures in there or sounds, you need to kind of sort of make it sound like it's recorded in the same room, if that makes sense. So it would have been cool to have it like had like a tiny little bit more reverb on the vocals just to kind of make it sit a bit better. That said though, I think still the vocals sounded really good. I'm happy with the melodies and the way we phrased them rhythmically. It was great as well. We clearly understand the fundamentals of music theory and composition. There was dynamic range to this track, even if there was a sense of constant perceived loudness throughout the bulk of it. There were moments where things came down or kind of like, you know, simmered or kind of rose up a little bit, but it was also well controlled in regards to the overall compression and the gluing of the track. I think finally it was nice enough without pumping to the bus compression and limiting what handled. But this is my review of this track from an act named Tyeon, titled They Know I'm Famous, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love by their various social medias and their YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe. Please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as either help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I'll catch you in the next review. Spiderhands out.